And so what's going to happen now is people who have access to the AI, they'll have a distinct advantage over people who do not have access.
Welcome to AI Diatribe. I'm Jason Lowe. You can call me JLowe. And today we're diving into something most people aren't thinking about yet. What happens when AI meets your data infrastructure? My guest is David McPeak, president of Sky Data Vault, which provides infrastructure, backup, and disaster recovery as a service. He's been in network and infrastructure since his military days, and he's seeing firsthand how companies are completely underestimating the risks of AI data access. We're talking security vulnerabilities, the coming wave of AI agents, and why the gap between AI haves and have-nots might reshape everything faster than you think. Here's our conversation. Well, David, I'm quite excited to talk with you about so many different things. I want you to know that I took a really good look at your LinkedIn history. You've always, and I mean always, been in network and infrastructure. You started out in the military, for crying out loud. What was so appealing about it to you? I mean, the question that comes to my mind is, did you actively seek out a role in that area while you're in the military, or did they just basically say, all right, you got this on the ASVAB and this is where you're going, and you're going to be assigned there, and it just happened to be a happy circumstance that steamrolled into an occupation?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I am one of the few people that I know that is doing what I've always wanted to do. I was into IT even before I joined the Marine Corps. We're talking about, I came out of high school in the early 90s, and, I was the kid that they were pulling out of class to come install the software on the high school computer, the one computer they had in the office.
Dude, me too. We have bonded over this. I had the same phenomenon while I was
That's
in high
right,
school.
yeah.
Please
Swapping
continue.
out the stack of floppy disks. I did all of that. When I joined the military, I actually went in as a programmer. And my thinking was that I would be better suited as a programmer. I want to build software. I want to build, different solutions, things like that. And when I joined, as it quite often happens, I ended up not being a programmer, but I was in IT, and I was maintaining an AS400, which is a mainframe. And I was like literally mounting reels of, the big tapes, like those things. I was dealing with those. It was taking college courses at night for programming to stay on track. And I found out very quickly that that was not my jam. I did very poorly in that. But once I got transferred away from managing the mainframe, I ended up at a unit that did not have a mainframe and needed network engineering. So I ended up getting into that aspect of the business. At that point, again, in the mid 90s, I was pulling cable. I was building networks from scratch. We're talking about Novell NetWare. We're talking about Banyan Vines, like the really earlier type of networking systems before Active Directory even came out. So no, this is what I love to do, and I've always done it. God willing, I'll keep doing it forever.
Boy, amen to that.
Yeah.
For sure. I think it's also really interesting that as soon as you get out of the military, I mean, you immediately dive into this recurring pattern. Let's go build a business, get it up to a certain point, get it acquired or get it sold. Then you go and work for somebody else for a while, whether that be by virtue of the acquisition or going and just taking a break, and then you cycle and repeat. So ultimately, here we are now at Sky Data Vault. There had to be some sort of an impetus or some sort of a catalytic circumstance that led you to want to create and found Sky Data Vault. So what was it that you were looking to do with Sky Data Vault that you couldn't do elsewhere or that you hadn't previously done?
So it's a great question, because that's actually exactly what happened. So my second company, the company I owned before this, I sold to a company in Rockville, Maryland. And we were doing what you would now know as cloud services, but at the time it was called hosted applications. We were hosting email, BlackBerries, we were hosting desktops, those types of things. And when the company was acquired, I came on as the director of cloud services. And one of the first things I was asked to do was to develop a cloud-based backup system. And, we're talking 2010, 2011. So there were not a lot of great options. And the price point was also quite challenging. So you were talking about, $5 a gig to store your data in the cloud, plus people were typically using, T1s or, DSL, even like some of the faster systems were a real challenge. So I built it out as best I can with the software that was available at the time, which was not great, and ran that for them for about a year. And then I left that organization and took a look at what was available from a software perspective, what had changed, and decided that I could actually do version 2 much better. And the prices were starting to drop. I also saw that everybody was starting to rush into like cloud services like AWS, things like that. But those costs were very, very high. And being an engineer and knowing how to set these things up, I made perfect sense to acquire the hardware and deploy it and build the cloud myself. So that's what I did. I started that with a proof of concept that I ran out of a data center, and very quickly got it up and running and was able to start offering the services.
That's a very great origin story, actually. I mean, how often can you actually take something that you thought about a long time ago and you're waiting for the technology to catch up and then suddenly you're able to do it? And there's a real, like, let's call it synergy there with artificial intelligence, right? Because AI for so long has been something that people conceptualize and we're not sure what it can do or it's not quite powerful. And here we are over the last couple of years. We've had such revolution in the face of machine learning, deep learning, and more particularly in LLMs with all of the different things that it can now do that even 2 years ago, we were hoping and waiting that the technology would catch up. But I digress. It's kind of interesting that you're in this spot because, as I said previously, data is crucial. You have to have data. You don't have data, AI doesn't work. And it kind of feels to me like there might be a little bit of a underestimation as to just how fragile the system is that is out there, meaning AI systems connected to their data. And this is all very risky. I mean, is that the case? You're the person that's on the front line and is observing this. Is this a phenomenon that is rampant where people are completely underestimating the risk that they're under with using their data with AI?
I would say at this point, it probably goes just a little bit deeper. I mean, we're still at the very early stages of AI rollout, so to speak, which is going to be in our lives forever. And I still run into people who just really don't fully understand where we are today and what the capabilities are today. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of education that needs to go into the user base if you're going to expose your data to AI and then be able to share that out with the staff. I think one of the misconceptions is that people just assume that it will do what you want it to do the first time. And what I find when I use AI is that even if I use an example, like I'm trying to put together a document, I'm going to ask it to produce the document, but then something's not going to be right. I'm going to have to tweak it. I'm going to have to come back, say, hey, modify this, et cetera. And it's very similar with any other application. So specific to your point, one of the things that we do see is a large concern for, let's say you're using Office 365 and you've got Copilot, right? So you got your data in SharePoint, you got your data in OneDrive. What's stopping the person at the front desk from asking what my salary is or what, someone's social security number is? Right. And so that data, if it's in your pool of data and the AI has access to it, well, how does it know not to give that information out or, what's sensitive, what's not sensitive? So there has to be kind of a guideline around that. And I think that's going to be like one of the more critical pieces.
So not only the availability of the data itself, but also the level of access that AI should have to sensitive data.
Sure. And I think one of the things is like right now, what you and I are used to is you're going to have like a shared files environment. You're going to have folders and you double click on accounting. Well, you can't get into accounting because it's locked down, right? So what's going to happen with AI, because it has the ability to parse through all of it, you may see a scenario in which companies start to kind of lose that structure and just the data just gets thrown in. And at that point, how do you decide who has access to what and what information can be shared and what cannot be shared? So there have to be things put in place, very specific. Right now, probably like the safest thing you could do would be to not have that particular data in your pool of information that's available to the AI. But we're going to have to get way more sophisticated than that.
Yeah, I could see a time in the future, well, as agentic AI becomes a lot more capable, I mean, full CRUD permissions for AI as a user, not only permissions for data access, but also what it can do. I realize that there's a level of that right now, but it's probably going to be a little bit more formalized and structured as these agentic AI elements become actual entities that you're almost treating like another employee on the network as it relates to access.
That is what I would say is a little bit of an understatement. I would think more of like groupings of employees or armies of employees. As soon as agents start to come out, then you're going to start seeing, that type of structure being stacked, where you might have an agent managing other agents doing specific tasks. And that's really, we talk about how AI is going to accelerate the workforce. Again, people don't really realize, how fast we're going to be able to go once it really starts to roll out. And once the applications start to get more, more focused and more able to really understand what you as a user wants and be able to deliver that data to you.
Interesting. So, do you have any real life stories, something where you've been on the front lines and you've observed some of these struggles or these challenges that you could share?
I can't say that I've seen anything to date specific to like security and permissions of access to the data. And I think that the reason for that is that most people are really kind of gun shy. And, no one's like, oh, sure, open up all the data to the AI. I think that even in our own organization, we're looking very closely at what we have to do to lock that down, because a lot of the settings and the options are not there for us just yet. So we're being, kind of cautious about it. I think that you're going to start seeing AI being built into a lot of applications. Veeam, for example, announced at their Veeam On conference that they are going to have AI built into their application, where you'll be able to query the AI and it'll be able to go through your snapshots and look at the data and respond back. And that's, quite literally what I'm talking about right now, right? So which data and for whom. So it's, we're still very far away from a position where it's clear as to what's going to be secure and not secure.
Interesting. So, do you see that as being the biggest obstacle for companies that want to dive into things, that they've got to have their house in order before they jump up to this higher level capability for AI?
I think the majority of the challenges that we have with AI right now are going to be short lived, right? So you probably hear a lot like, this is the worst AI you'll ever work with.
Oh boy, how many times do you hear that a day? A
I
million
know.
or so? Yeah.
But what I'm seeing right now is not just the security aspect, but also the training. So depending on the type of individual that you may be hiring to be on your staff, there's a difference between someone who's 20 years old and is really like a cloud native type individual and someone who might be a little closer to like 60, who doesn't have a full understanding of, how it works and what the capabilities are. So I think that's a challenge, is making sure that the workforce actually knows what the options are and how to use it. Even if you look at a simple example, like a summary of a meeting, right? Your ability to go through and query the AI for, how much backups did they need, or how much, space did they need, or anything like that. Some people that we've run across didn't even know that you could do that. I think at this point, really, hey, I can create documents or I can edit an email with it. Some people are perfectly fine with that. So we need to push more on the education side. The reason I say it's short lived is that we are going to get to a point in AI where it will understand exactly what you mean and it will know what the implications are for doing this, that, and the other. And so, I think to myself, like the old lady walking down the street with the cane right now, she doesn't know how to use AI, but in, 6 to 12 months, she may not need to have a course on AI, but she'll just speak to it like it was another person. So the learning curve is there now, but I think it's not going to be here forever.
Well, but despite that, there's probably a little bit of, and this is just me with my personal conjecture here. I envision, let's call it a scenario where someone is in the starting block on a track and there's not a gun. There's just you start running.
Yeah.
And there may be someone that started out behind you on the track, but because they started running sooner, if you start running at the time that they hit you, they've already got so much forward momentum and speed going that it's going to be really hard for you to catch up, even if you start running at the moment they actually come right to your side. And I think that there, like you say, there will be future improvements, but there's a lot of merit in diving in and really starting to try and figure this stuff out, or at least incorporate and implement things where you can now, because that'll give you a head start and an advantage as you start seeing things develop and make things easier. And you're just going to be that much closer to nirvana, this nirvana state of having AI implemented exactly how you want, and you're going to have less to learn. I mean, would you concur on that?
I would for now. Once, you can pick up a device or not even just, speak and it responds to you and there's no training required, I think that that may not be quite as important. I think the main thing that I look at, these days, I've seen this with a few different technologies throughout my career, but I break it down to the haves and the have-nots. So In this country, for example, there are people right now who do not have access to the internet, period. And I do. So you and I don't really think about that very much, but we have a tremendous advantage over those individuals.
Oh, yeah, extraordinarily
What's
big advantage.
right? Exactly. And so what's going to happen now is you're going to have people who have access to the AI and the people who do not. And so, and I think that the people who do have access to it, whether they're more, well trained on it or they're more comfortable with it in the short term may matter, but they'll have a distinct advantage over people who do not have access to the AI. And even in my own work, I interact with people who have access to the internet. They know how to use computers, but they're still their thinking is not quite on the same level as far as leaning on AI. I have conversations with the AI daily, at least in some cases for extended periods of time. That gives me a distinct advantage. I think that, having access to it, of course, is one thing, but really, if you have access to the internet, you have access to AI. And as you said, in the short term, there are advantages to be had, but I think it'll be short lived.
So I'm kind of drawing in my head a little bit of a parallel here. There's a moat between private closed source frontier models and open source models. And this is the phenomenon we've seen over the last year, right? That moat is just kind of shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And now we get word that OpenAI is going to release very soon an open source model that is highly capable and probably pretty darn close to what it is that they're having through their paid model. And so this moat is shrinking so rapidly over time. The same moat, according to what you're saying, at least as far as some sort of a first mover advantage or first mover knowledge and familiarity with the tool, is going to reduce over time. Is that what you're saying?
100%. There's no question about it. But where that leads us, I don't know. I don't know if it's a positive or a non-positive thing, but it is absolutely going to happen. And I'm in some networking groups where I'm the only person in IT, and I have to have these conversations with people who ask me a lot of questions, and people are concerned about job loss and those types of things, which is a reasonable concern, something that we're going to have to contend with faster, I think, than people think. But yeah, it's absolutely narrowing. And once everybody's on the same playing field, that's really when I don't really know what that's going to look like. But case in point, I was at lunch with a group of people the other day, and one of them was an attorney. We were speaking about a legal document unrelated to her. And I said, we had to make a change to a portion of the document. So just drop it in, your AI and have it changed, And the attorney looked at me like, well, what? Like, basically, like, am I out of a job? Right. And so a lot of those things are gonna start to happen. But when everybody has access to the technology, it's going to be a different story.
I agree. I'm actually right aligned with you, at least as far as the socioeconomic impact of AI. I think it's going to be a lot more drastic, a lot faster than everybody thinks. But let's not all go robots are coming, because I know that drives some people a little bit crazy out there. I do think it would be good I'd like to focus a little bit, particularly on your area of practice and the effect it has on AI. So specifically infrastructure. And there is a phenomenon now of everything shifted to the cloud. It's like this big pendulum. We had everything that was on-prem and private, server clusters and this and that and the other. And then suddenly it swung to this massive, everything's got to be in the cloud. And now the phenomenon we're seeing is that people are really starting to see the benefits of on-prem and private implementations of various things, be it AI, be it data, be it applications, mostly from a security and an access perspective, but also from an efficiency perspective. And I'm sure that is going to be exacerbated or changed a little bit by the phenomenon of edge AI, because right now, a lot of these big AI platforms doing all of these wonderful, capable things, they are cloud only. But we're going to reach a point where edge AI becomes a thing. And this could be something as simple as really beefing up the AI capabilities on our phones. This could be something as beefy as having some of these AI-enabled gadgets or whatchamacallits or thingamajiggers that can actually do stuff locally without having to necessarily get onto the internet and source some big thing up in the cloud. So how has that affected your core offerings, or has it? This movement to a hybrid model, this movement to let's keep some stuff in the cloud, but maybe have some stuff local or on-prem.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, there was an enormous, what I would call an exodus to the cloud. Again, in my career, I've seen this type of move often. The more recent one was with virtualization. And I would hear routinely, I don't know what it is, but we need to do it. And that was the push. And the cloud was the same way. And coming back to what I was saying about when I first started this company, looking at the costs, that never made much sense to me. So we are seeing, what people are referring to as repatriation of their data or their servers, resources. People are moving out of the public clouds. A large part of that also is pressure from the any kind of fees, egress fees to remove data from the cloud or move data out. But we definitely run into organizations that are looking to move, I wouldn't say back on-prem, but out of a public cloud. And so for our business, we definitely are postured to discuss to people, okay, you don't want to be in the public cloud, but you don't want to be in a server in the back room. Right. So Sky Data Vault can offer something, more robust, more managed, full service, white glove service for infrastructure and backup and DR. And there's some cases where it's a total move. There are other cases where it's either gradual or it's a different piece. So now we're in an environment where we have bandwidth speeds that are fast enough that you can have a multi-node network that maybe, spans the east and west coasts. So we can assist them in building that, whether they want to stay in a public cloud or move out of it.
Isn't fiber wonderful?
Fixes a lot of problems, makes a lot
Yes,
of
it
things
does.
easier, for
Oh,
sure.
yes, for sure. It's really interesting to think about architecture and infrastructure because the access to the data, and again, I'm looking at this with a bend towards the artificial intelligence perspective, but AI without secure. This is a quote, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on this quote. I read somewhere the other day, AI without security is just a very efficient threat vector.
Okay,
Okay.
sure.
So that, in my mind, is especially pertinent in the face of ransomware attacks and different things like that, which then spills into a lot of the offerings you have pertinent as it relates to backup and disaster recovery. I mean, do you think a statement like that is accurate?
I would say so. I think that, my view on it is that it's going to be more of an overlay. So again, the key pivotal point I see is going to be once agents become available and really are able to perform the tasks, which may not be the first version of them, but I think it'll probably be pretty close, either the first or the second. Once the agent can perform tasks for you, it's a whole different ballgame. Right. And initially, what you're going to see is an environment where you're really overlaying it over your life. Right. So it's going to interact with Microsoft Word. It's going to interact with Google. It's going to interact with Travelocity. It will, do your email and things like that. We'll get into the more complex things, like maybe it'll reconfigure your server if you ask it to. It'll modify virtual machine resources. That could go on and on. Check the backups, run the backups, etc. And so I think that the advent of the agents is really going to be the key differentiator, and that's when everything is going to change.
You're talking about the movie Her. I don't know if
Yes,
you've seen that movie.
I saw part of it. Yes,
Yeah, fascinating movie, and
no
I think
doubt.
that's a really interesting demonstration of what AI could become very rapidly. It's also interesting that AI now we're simulating some of that, but really it's just highly informed automation. At least at this point, we don't have that AGI level or even relatively truly autonomous level of agentic capability right now. We're getting there, and we're getting there very rapidly. But
Yeah.
it's a whole lot of automation. But let's go back to the ransomware thing for a minute. Is this really changing how your customers are addressing backup and disaster recovery? Is that a big thing right now?
I haven't heard very much about that with regards to AI. I don't know that people are thinking about that just yet. People definitely come to us for our disaster recovery solutions as an option to prevent or resolve any issues with crypto lock or with any kind of malware or things like that, but not with relation to AI. As I said earlier, though, I talked about how Veeam is going to have AI integrated. I think you're going to see a lot more of that type of thing where it's going to be integrated into the applications that you use. I think Visa just released something a couple weeks back that they have an agent. So that's going to become more common until eventually you will be running your own AI. And that might be something that's, SaaS based, or you would run your own which is something that, we're looking at, which is essentially you can purchase even from NVIDIA sells a device that you could use as kind of an AI core. So probably see a lot more of that, but specific to the backup and disaster recovery with regards to AI, I'm not seeing anything yet. Again, I think once the agents come out, it'll be a different story.
So you mentioned you're working on an AI. Is this the primary way that you're starting to incorporate AI into your service offerings, or what is your plan there? Or what do you have working already?
Yep. So we wanted to get on to AI in any way that we could as fast as possible. In the beginning, it was really just lean in and let's see if we can find things that are going to, make a material difference in our organization, whether it be how we service our customers or deliver our service. And what we found is the same as everybody else initially is, transcription of meetings, summaries of meetings, recordings of meetings, those types of things. So that was one of the first things that we leaned into, much like most organizations. I think that what we're looking at now is other ways that we can lean into it. So can it maybe answer tickets, like very commonly asked questions? Things like that. We're a little challenged because the questions that we get are quite technical. And so it's not just a yes, no answer.
Not a whole lot of level 1, level 2 support. Sometimes it's higher than that, yeah?
Yeah. So, and we're looking at scenarios in which people would be able to open tickets, say if they needed to modify some resources on their virtual machines in our infrastructure, or they wanted to change the schedule of their backups, or they wanted to run a backup, right? So maybe the backup is scheduled to run at 8, but they're going to do an upgrade. And it's 11 a.m. They want to run it. The AI would be able to help them with that. But that's still very, very, early days. One way that we do use it that we have seen a difference is in writing code. So we have a department that is writing software for us. We're creating interfaces for our customers to be able to manage these things by a human. Again, ultimately, once the agents come out, the agents will be interacting with it. And so we're having some good success with coding and with writing code, and that's really accelerating how fast we can push out these products.
AI coding tools are definitely a thing. Vibe coding is a thing. I'm sure you're not exactly vibe coding, but you might be using Claude Code or something like this to really either do some initial frameworks for the code or even maybe doing some hardening and things like that. So what other areas get you excited about AI in your particular niche? Or are there things that maybe you're a little worried about? What are some of these other things that are related to your particular niche that AI could have an effect on?
So, as I said earlier, I still believe that we're in kind of this like zone where we have to like learn how to use it. And I think that will be short-lived, as I said. I think that in what we can see now is like recently I've been starting to see a lot of ads for AI cold callers where, they're calling in and actually having real conversations with potential prospects and gathering data, lead gathering, those types of things. Probably won't be too long before there's an AI answering the phone when that AI calls, right? And that's what I'm talking about, where there's going to be like an acceleration of services. So now the AI is talking to you in English and it takes time to talk, right? But when it's an AI to AI, it happens so much faster. So all of these, and that's just for one example of like, the cold calling. But if you apply that to, bookkeeping, accounting, email, engineering, planning, anything, legal work, we have to think, I always try to think, okay, this is cool right here. Version 1 is cool. What's version 2 look like? And the pace at which we're moving right now, you don't have time to think about version 1. If you're planning to address version 1, you're behind. And so you have to really push your mind to think as far out as you can, whether it's version 2, version 3, to see about accommodating those types of technologies that are really going to be ubiquitous very quickly.
It's interesting because product management as a discipline is all about that. And I don't think it's ever been more important than it is now.
Yeah, no doubt.
Especially as it relates to doing those future versionings and making sure that you're not only dealing with version 1, but laying the groundwork and putting in the fundamentals and the dependencies for version 2, version 3, and version 4 as part of your rollout of number 1, so it'll make it so that you can roll those out a little bit faster.
Yes.
I say that because of my product management background, and it was always interesting to me trying to weave those interdependencies into the current roadmap and make sure that they were addressed and somehow defend them, to my boss who was saying, well, but we don't have time to address that. We got to deal with just this stuff. How can we justify doing that? But it's so important for future versions. We've just got to do it. Yeah, it's a real conundrum for product management. But now, in the face of this rapid evolution of artificial intelligence and all of these different features and the pace of innovation, if you don't do that, you're screwed.
It's
You're
a
literally
completely different
screwed.
world. It's a
Yeah,
completely different world.
yeah.
And then if you really want to stretch yourself, think about version 10,
Oh boy.
right? And
Now
so
we're chess players. Now we're Deep Blue. Now we're going to be Kasparov getting our butt kicked by AI in the future. Yes, that's the case.
yeah, well, there's, I mean, of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but there's definitely going to be an acceleration of pace. At some point, there'll be AIs trying to hack into your network, and then you'll have an AI to protect yourself against those types of things, and it'll evolve and so on and so forth, just like anything else.
Anything else that you feel like we're underestimating besides the socioeconomic impact on the job market and the economy? I mean, those are broad strokes, yes, but
Yeah.
what else might we be underestimating here in the face of rapid AI development?
Well, I think that the points that you just listed are really the main ones that I think about, but I tend to not think of them in a negative way. I think that there's a lot of potential good things that can happen. I think most of what can happen is potentially good and make things better for everybody. You know, Even if you look at just some things that are going to be facilitated with regards to medicine, I hear a lot about like how AI is assisting and it can predict cancer and things like that much sooner than humans can, developing drugs and tools that could be used that are better than what we have now, sitting alongside a surgeon while they're in surgery, assisting with whatever. So i I see that it's going to touch every single aspect of our lives, quite literally. The food you're going to buy at the grocery store is going to be transported by an AI, by a driverless truck. We're seeing a lot of cultivation of vegetables and fruits. It's all done by robotics and managed by AI. So every aspect of our life is going to be touched by it. And what I think is interesting is that the biggest part, although of course there's some concerns about people's jobs and losing their jobs and how that'll affect the economy, but I also am of the belief that the AI, and not just AI but also just general automation, whether that be robotics or AI, is going to ultimately push the price of things down to zero. So I was speaking to a friend of mine who has a plumbing company, decent size. I think he has like 50 trucks. And we were talking about robotics and how he can use AI. And, some of the robots that they're talking about coming out are, $20,000, $30,000 that you would lease for $300 a month. And I posed to him, like, what's stopping me from renting, 10 robots and opening a plumbing shop? Right. And the effect of that is what I was just saying. The prices of things start to plummet down to near zero. Just like you're mass producing any widget, well, now you can mass produce it even better. And everything from the gathering of the raw resources all the way to the delivery to the customer has been simplified, and the human element has been removed, and now it's more efficient. How does that affect the price? And so I'm a firm believer that we're going to see some big shifts in the economy.
I'm with you on that. It's interesting that you mentioned the plumber analogy because I use that one myself. Plumber, construction worker, road construction worker.
My goodness.
A lot of these, everybody's saying that AI is threatening white collar work. Well, yeah, maybe AI is, but then you take that intelligence and you put it in a robotic body that has the agility and the strength and the capability of doing these things. And now you're threatening every aspect of blue collar work. But I actually, believe it or not, have some future episodes that are going to be addressing that on the podcast. So that's
Okay.
going to be some fun and lively conversation.
Yeah, I've been seeing lately you know, I'm not a big fan of mowing the yard. Yeah, I have bad allergies, and that's usually like the kiss of death for me. And now I'm seeing, lawnmowers that are fully automated. And I watched a show where there's a guy running a lawn care service, and he pulls up and opens the back of his trailer, and a bunch of automated, you know, lawnmowers come out and start mowing everybody's lawn. Right. So yeah, it's going to affect everybody from the top all the way down.
So you mentioned that you use AI on a daily basis. I'm curious, what are the tools or what is the main tool that you use every day? What do you use regularly?
For work, I use Copilot because that, as I said, we use it for Office and integrates with all of our applications. Myself, I use Claude. I found that it's the best for me. I tried quite a few of them, uh, Grok, etc., ChatGPT. But I found that the interface with Grok and the if I could say conversations that we were having fit well with my personality. So yeah, I use it, as I said, probably every single day, multiple times a day.
a day doesn't go by that I haven't tapped into. I personally subscribe to Claude
Yep.
and ChatGPT. And then I also have a couple of local models downloaded on the computer that I'm actually using to do this with you. I have a Mistral version, I have a Gemma version, I have a Llama version. I even went and grabbed the DeepSeek one that everybody's having such a great time with these days.
Careful.
I haven't tried to get it to tell me bad things about what goes on in China yet. I haven't tested those limits, but I've thought about it. But yeah, it's really interesting how quickly I've incorporated it into just about everything I do.
Yeah.
And I mean, literally everything.
Yeah.
It's,
You have to push your mind really, like, what can I do beyond using this thing to create a document for me?
and this is where creativity is going to become so much more important
Sure.
moving forward. You're no longer going to be a rote worker, because what's going to do the rote work? AI and robotics. And
Yes.
so it's going to be your critical thinking skills, your creativity skills, your communication skills that are going to be what help you utilize AI and get the most out of it and do bigger and better things.
For sure. Yeah, especially in areas that you don't have a lot of experience. So, a few months back, I used it to help me write up a document in order to be able to go to the bank to get a loan to expand our business. So, and, took several iterations going back and forth, making modifications and checking the work, right? You always have to check the work, but ultimately it resulted in exactly what I wanted. I use it for all kinds of things that you probably, sometimes I think I don't know how to do that, kind of like stops you, right? And if you can replace that with let me ask the AI, yeah, you'll go a lot farther.
One of the questions that I like to ask as I get to the end of a podcast episode, and our time is coming close to an end here. And before I get ahead of myself, thank you so much for the time that you've spent. This has actually been a great conversation.
My pleasure.
But one of the things I definitely want to cover is I like to talk to professionals in the space and get their advice for companies and individuals that are just getting started in AI. If you had some general guidance to give for how to get started with AI, where would you recommend that they start? What would you recommend they do?
I think the easiest thing to do, and what I actually recommend to my friends who are asking me exactly that, is just have a conversation with it. Open up whichever one you want. ChatGPT is obviously the most well known, I think, and just start having a conversation. How are you? What can you do for me? What can you help me with? And that's really how I started, because I had a hard time like, what is this thing going to do for me? Like, what can it delete spam? Like, I'm interested in those types of things. And it wasn't until I started having, just general conversation and allowed it to go, in whichever direction. I think asking it, what can you help me with? What types of things can you help me with? Really opens up a lot of doors. And then I think people start to realize what they can use it for, and, how they can lean on it, and how it'll accelerate whatever, thought process they have, and be able to lean on it as I do and take advantage of it.
Very, very well said. Once again, thank you so much for the time today. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really think people are going to get a lot out of it. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, that's our conversation with David McPeak from Sky Data Vault. If this got you thinking about AI's bigger implications, you know what to do. Subscribe, like, follow, hit all the buttons so you don't miss future episodes. So until next time, keep your eyes open. This AI revolution is coming, ready or not.